So SpongeBob was one of my favorite cartoons as a kid, one of my favorite shows. And I've seen videos recently where people kind of describe SpongeBob and they go through clips of SpongeBob talking about how kind of insane the show was and how far ahead of its time it was when it comes to either kind of predicting the future or in another way really showing that the show was obviously made by adults, but you can almost see how these adults were portraying their own struggles in their life into this show. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the three main characters of SpongeBob and how they correspond to actual everyday people, either in your life or maybe you who's watching this video. So the three main characters are going to be SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward. And now if you've watched SpongeBob, which I assume you have if you've clicked on this video, you probably know how each one of those characters interacts with their environment. You have SpongeBob, this happy-go-lucky kid. He loves his job. He loves his friends. Nothing can bother him, no matter how hard life gets. Squidward, he's usually kind of angry. He hates his job. He hates his neighbors. He's wrapped kind of in this cycle of just really being bummed out. But what I want to get to here in a little bit about Squidward is that he has a dream of playing his clarinet for a living and being in a band. Lastly is Patrick. Patrick's also pretty interesting because while he may come off, he's unemployed, right? He might come off as really dumb. And in theory, he lives under a rock, like that's actually where he lives. I'm going to also talk a little bit more about how Patrick is maybe not as dumb or stupid as he comes off in the show. So let's start with SpongeBob. You know, as you're listening to this, maybe think of yourself as who do you kind of correlate with more? Who do you see yourself as? SpongeBob. And I think SpongeBob is somebody who we all, I guess, maybe strive to be. Like he's this guy who wakes up super excited for work. He goes to work. While his coworkers may hate him, Squidward, he loves what he does, and it's almost like he never works a day in his life. All the bad things that happen to him, maybe with Mr. Krabs cutting his salary, giving him a hard time, Squidward giving him a hard time, it doesn't matter to SpongeBob. And I look at SpongeBob in my own life, and I'm like, if I could live more like SpongeBob, then I feel like in theory I would be so much happier. Now, life is not that simple as I wish it would be, but SpongeBob lives a life that I think we almost all strive for. Is somebody who is so incredibly happy with everything around them and just relatively so unbothered. And while I know I can't necessarily be SpongeBob all the time, I think if we take this show and we look at it from a lens of the people who were writing this show, I think they also wanted to be SpongeBob. SpongeBob's the main character. SpongeBob is the guy who creates all the energy in the show. Like, wouldn't we want to be more like SpongeBob in our everyday life? Now going on to Squidward. I have been, unfortunately, a lot more like Squidward in my everyday. And I think a lot of you guys have been too. Squidward is a guy who's very pessimistic. Every day he wakes up with a frown. He hates fun. He goes to work. He hates work. He hates his coworkers. He hates his neighbors. And while he may, hating them more or less or not liking them at some points because they're annoying is relatively acceptable. But overall, Squidward does not try to change his outcome. You know, he always is a little bit upset, a little bit angry, annoyed. And even when SpongeBob and Patrick are outside having a lot of fun, he's always looking at them with some disdain. And I think, myself included, we go through life and we forget that it's supposed to be fun. We may not always be happy, but we are supposed to be having fun. And another thing I want to point out is Squidward, in many episodes, he has this dream of playing the clarinet in a band in front of large audiences or doing that for a living. And I think a lot of us had dreams when we were younger that didn't really pan out to our career. We work a different job. So I think we all kind of fall under this category of being more like Squidward. And while we might not be able to change that, if we do our best to live more like SpongeBob, incorporate more of SpongeBob's life inside of a Squidward life, then we get basically a Squidward who pursues his hobby as a creative realm. He goes to work knowing that it is a means for him to survive, and that if he brought a little bit better attitude to his work, he might actually enjoy it a little bit better. Maybe if he greeted customers or took orders with a little bit more of a happy smile on his face, his day might get better. Because not every day has to be a day where we frown or we're angry or we're frustrated. And while sometimes we feel that way, I think a simple mindset shift will help us be a little bit more like SpongeBob. Last but not least is Patrick. And the cool thing about Patrick, besides being unemployed and it not affecting his everyday life, is simply that while he may come off stupid and he may live under a rock, I think honestly, almost living under a rock in today's world is actually a really good thing. And here's why. When you, quote unquote, live under a rock, you are not influenced by a lot of media, the world, all these things that vie or try to get your attention. You're not influenced by those. So Patrick, for example, he might not know what happens in the government, in politics, in these things that try to really divide us. He lives under this rock where nothing bothers him. Not anything bothers him. There's not a single thing that Patrick could be bothered by, except just hanging around and playing with SpongeBob. And while, of course, not working is something that we can't do, in a sense, getting away from social media and the media in general and kind of living under a rock, meaning we don't have to know everything that's going on in the world around us. We actually might be a lot happier not knowing these things. In theory, I don't think we were meant to know everything that was going on in the world, because every time I see a headline of something bad, it brings me some anxiety, but also it really gets me a little bit upset, because there's nothing I can do to really stop any of those things. And from an interesting perspective, it's like if I didn't know they happen, where would my life be? I wouldn't be worried about them. And I don't say these things as you shouldn't focus on things in your community or politics or other things like that, but I think we focus on them too much in today's world. And so I think if you kind of combine, I think the most realistic approach is if you combine all three of those main characters into one person. You get somebody who is high energy, enjoys their job enough to not hate getting out of bed every morning. They pursue a meaningful passion in a creative realm, a good hobby. They are somebody who enjoys their neighbors. While they may not be best friends with their neighbors, they don't hate their neighbors. And then also you have somebody who in turn doesn't let the world affect them too much. They they're in control of what they consume, and the news and the media does not affect them as it does a lot of other people. And so this was a super philosophical way of basically being like, all three traits of SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward, we can kind of combine into one person, because in theory, we are a lot more like Squidward, I think. But if we take traits from SpongeBob and Patrick, we can kind of make something good out of Squidward. And I think there is something really good inside of all of us. So that's all I got. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Peace.